Fine. I'll watch out what I say. I always ask when I go, is this being live streamed or Facebook, whatever, because I represent National Center for Life and Liberty. Some of the things that I say, I have to be careful saying them, or there can be repercussions back on the church, and so I just have to be careful how some of the things I say. Let me just first of all, and my daughter asked me to please extend to all of you our heartfelt appreciation for your graciousness and kindness to us in the death of my dear wife. She died on February 21st, and I'm sure Pastor Rusty has told you a little bit about it, but it was quite sudden, quite unexpected, and she had fallen, broken some bones, but she was doing well. And then when on Saturday morning on the 20th, she passed out, and we wound up getting her to the intensive care, and they said, well, she has an internal bleed, and her blood pressure dropped to 59 over 39, just like that, and they found that she had a mass and had bleeding around the mass, and they were doing massive blood transfusions. She had total body blood replacement. I've never seen the type of transfusion equipment they use, but anyway, forcing blood into her body. Got her blood pressure back up to 110 over 60, but took her into a radiation treatment to, I'm not using the appropriate term, but cauterize the bleeding, but it was around a mass that was attached to her liver. And basically what happened was that the bleed out through her internal organs into shock. My daughter came in on Saturday night and was able to be with her on Sunday from 3 o'clock to 8. And she stayed with her mom. She was unconscious, but sedated. But make a long story short, my daughter left at 8, and at 9:30, we got a call that her heart had stopped. And I told Angie, I said, Mom stayed with you as long as you were there. But she slipped out and went to be with the Lord. It's been it's been a new normal, to say the least. Yesterday I was trying to get here, and Rusty told you about my episodes with the airplane and all of its problems, and sitting in Tampa airport for 6 hours. And then I got to Charlotte, and they couldn't put me on a plane for 5 hours. And then I finally got here and drove. So I had picked up a little booklet out of my library on grief by C.S. Lewis, Grief Observed. And I read the entire book yesterday. And, there are one of the things that C.S. Lewis does in this, it's a little short paperback, but one of the things that he does is he is extremely candid and honest about emotions, and how even though very committed believer, the bitterness, the anger, the whys, the what fors, and all of those things, they come rushing in. And but in spite of all of that, I was talking to my daughter, and I said, with all the loss and all the hurt and all the rest, there's one thing that stays in my mind. Most of you never met my wife. I don't know if any of you ever did. My wife was a Southern belle. I mean, she dressed to the nines, every hair in place, every makeup. She had to be just right to go out in public. I mean, that's just her. I mean, if she was going to go to the mailbox, I mean, she had to check everything else. I mean, she was just that way. And I told my daughter, I said, we had 3 oncologists tell us that mass was a malignancy, which would have necessitated unbelievable dosages of chemotherapy and radiation and surgeries and all the rest. And I said, in one way, I think God was gracious to Mom, because she never had to go through all of the sufferings that people who have those treatments many times have to go through, with hair loss and weight loss and all those kind of things, which would have been very difficult for her. So this is Mother's Day, and I had scheduled this, and Pastor Rusty called and said, do you still want to do this? I mean, can you do this? And then he called me back again just to be sure again. And I told him, I said, me coming and speaking, especially to a church like this church, is therapy. It's a great help. I've been traveling now for 5 weeks, speaking. But I'm pretty selective of where I go. The flowers you folks sent, the calls, the card, I mean, I can't say enough how much we appreciate that. I've got about 3 things to do. That's number 1. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. You have a wonderful pastor. My goodness, he is so gracious and so generous, and I appreciate that so very much. The second thing I want to do before I have you open your Bibles to the book of Psalms in Psalms 84. And somebody said, well, how long are you going to preach? It's getting late. It's Mother's Day. Well, my sermons are like link sausages. You can cut them off about anywhere. And so I see you got a big old clock back there, so I'll try to stay within reason, all right? But let me just say a word about NCLL. NCLL stands for National Center for Life and Liberty. And some of the things that have been mentioned this morning, prayer requests and concerns, is right down our alley. We represent churches. Yes, we come alongside. We partner with churches. We help you with understanding liability situations, bylaws. We will represent you in court. We're not a small organization. We have a very strong legal staff, 8 attorneys and 4 or 5 paralegals. We're in almost every state. We handle about 400, 450 phone calls a month in church-related and Christian ministries. But we also handle life issues. One of the issues that we handled was issues like Terry Chabot, the lady that they wanted to take off life support in Florida. And Attorney Gibbs was before the Supreme Court twice trying to keep her alive. We also represent a lot of pregnancy centers and do a lot of work along those lines. So we have legal staff and to come alongside you and help protect your First Amendment rights. How many of you know our religious liberty is under attack like I don't think I've ever seen, but maybe one other time in my life? The Equality Act is going to play havoc not only for the parachurch organizations, the pregnancy centers, and the adoption agencies, and all of that. Eventually, it will sift down to the church. And you say, well, how could it? We don't take federal funds. Well, it depends on how you define funds. You're a nonprofit. A nonprofit is a trust that is granted you by the government that says you don't have to pay taxes on your properties and so on and so on. So if they say, well, no, that and they push the envelope, even churches can come under attack. And so these are interesting days, to say the least. I introduce you to Junior Hill. That's the kind. He was unbelievable. But he made some statements about this that I want to give you that are profound. He said this. He said, looking at while going through the valley of weeping, and we all go through there, don't we? Our valleys may be different, but we find ourselves identifying them as the valleys of weeping. He said, remember, trouble is tempered by time. Joy cometh in the morning. Now, you don't get over it, but you learn how to get through it. He said also this. He said that going through the valley of Baca, or these times, is a process and should never be mistaken for the purpose. Wow, I've learned that in 74 years. What I'm going through today, I think, my goodness, how in the world, I don't realize it, but it's God moving me along. It's the process. It's not the ultimate end or the purpose. Junior said the process is understood after the fact. I look back on the illness of our boy, and when we were going through it, I had the whys and the anger and the bitterness and all the rest like everybody else, and I cried out to God and all the rest. Now, I look at a book over there my late wife wrote. Books written by unknown authors in Christian circles usually sell 500 to 1,000 copies. Over 1,000 is said to be a success. We're on our 10,000th copy, and it's never been in a bookstore. You see, I was looking at the process. God's looking at the product. Junior Hill reminded me of that in his notes. You can't hurry up God's process either, by the way. God does what he does in God's time, not your time, not my time. The process is often not joyful, or is unjoyful. It's like childbirth. There's nothing joyous about the event of giving birth, but the product. That's where the joy comes. Now, I'm sure some of you hear me say these things from Junior, and you say, well, how in the world do you relate that to the death of your wife? I can only do that as I read yesterday in the book, not part of my notes. I'd already written my message, but I'll share it with you. I got to thinking, C.S. Lewis wrote the book after the death of his wife. And at the end of the book, and the book is a hard read. I mean, it's a hard read. He's very intellectual. And for an old country boy like me, that's pretty tough. But nonetheless, I read every word of it. But at the end of the book, he come to the conclusion, basically, that life is in fact a journey that is a process, and the product of all of this is eternity with God, with Jesus, for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, just one life, will soon be past. And really only what's done for Christ is going to last. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. That's where it's headed. But while going through the valleys of Baca as we live, the psalmist says, diggeth the well. Now there are two interpretations. One is this. The interpretation is, as you are going through the valleys of weeping, as you're making the journey through the deserts of life, as you're going through the dangers of life, as you're going through the hardships of life, God provides some wells along the way. And he does, doesn't he? And you see some of those, and I outlined it this way. I said you see those in the first few verses of the chapter. Look at verse 3. There's a well of provision. Here he uses the illustration of the birds and around the temple. He said the sparrow and the swallows, well, they build their nests there, and they have a place where they can lay their eggs and raise their young. And there's plenty of food there because this is where they'll come in. They offer the sacrifices and the showbread and all the rest. And the crumbs are plentiful. God takes care of them. And the implication is that even when you're going through the darkest of hours and the hardest of times, God has not forgotten you. God will take care of you. It's amazing. We had 2 funerals for my wife. And Rusty, I don't know if you saw either one of those or not, but they were on Facebook and available. But we had 2 funerals. We had one in St. Petersburg, where we live now, and then the church that I pastored for 16 years in North Carolina, where my daughter lives. We had another funeral there. And then we had to ship the body there. And you say, well, my goodness, wasn't that expensive? Yeah. But I can tell you this, God provided. Because when you're going through the valley of weeping, as you travel through the valleys of Baca, God's got some wells along the way. The well of provision. So, then you notice in the next verses, in verse number 5, there's a well of strength. I call it the well of power, so I can keep my alliteration going. In verse number 5. He said, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee. I've had several people ask me, how are you going on? How are you keeping on? Not in my strength, but in his strength. I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. I'm not superhuman. I woke up this morning at 4 o'clock. It's Mother's Day. I got up and wrote a devotion and put it on Facebook. I do that every morning, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. How did you do that? I'm weak. I'm anemic. I'm broken. But I got a God who is bigger and greater than all the circumstances of my life. And he giveth strength in the hour of going through the valley of Baca. Then let me give you another one. I want to hurry. Verse 6. Here it talks about that well who passed into the valley of going through this time, then make it a well. God provides wells of refreshing when you go along. Let me tell you a little secret. And I don't just say this, and I don't say this everywhere I go. I won't say it next Sunday, but I'll say it this Sunday. This is a well of refreshing for me. Your pastor has been so gracious and so kind. This church has been so caring. You don't find that everywhere, folks. But along the ways of the valley and going through the valleys of weeping, God will put some of them wells along. This morning at 4:35, about 5:30, I got a text from the former president of Davis College. It used to be Practical Bible. He just said, Bobby and I are praying for you today, Rudy. We love you. A well refreshing. About an hour or so later, my phone rang. I picked it up. It was my former executive pastor, Tim Murr. Hey, Doc. Praying for you today, man. Wells of refreshing. Let me tell you, God places wells of refreshing. When you're going through the hard times, look for them. Anticipate them. When your soul thirsts, God has a satisfying drink for you along the way. Diggeth a well. Then you notice there's a well, it's a place of service in verse number 10. I'd rather be a doorkeeper. There's always a work to do. And when I'm up here doing this, I am being refreshed in the valley of Baca. Because I'm serving. I told my daughter, I said, honey, how do you think Dad do just sit down in the chair at the house, sit there and, pardon my French, wallow around in my sorrow? You got to get busy. When you're going through your hard times in life, find something meaningful to do for others and for the glory of God. It'll help the hurt. Then notice there's a well of promises. No good thing will he withhold from them to walk uprightly. Somebody said there's a promise for every day. I don't know if it is or not. But I know one thing. The promises of God are what you hold on to when you're walking through the valley of Baca. His grace is sufficient. Now there's another interpretation. We've got 2 sermons, only got 1 to go. There's another interpretation. It was the interpretation that I think probably motivated Junior Hill to write his comments. And that is that what the psalmist is saying is as you are making your way to Israel, to Jerusalem, dig some wells along the way because there's some other folks coming after you. They're going to need some help too. And I'm just going to tell you, when you're going through your hard times in life and your difficulties of life, you need to dig some wells. When I'm going through my hard times, I need to dig some wells.